Chapter 1, Prelude. Eleanor, you must come to my wedding next week. Amelia Grant said goodbye to Eleanor Bennet with a happy face, not forgetting to remind her once more before leaving. I know, I'll definitely be there. Eleanor Bennet hugged her friend, and they bid farewell. Watching her friend's silhouette, Eleanor smiled faintly, but there was a hint of bitterness in that smile. As friends settled down one by one, she couldn't help but feel a bit lonely, still single herself. As a PhD in medicine, she always performed miracles in the operating room, but her love life was tumultuous. Eleanor Bennet chuckled to herself, perhaps this is life, gaining one thing means losing another. With her cold demeanor, she had grown accustomed to this loneliness. Eleanor Bennet drove towards the hospital. That was where her entire life was. Eleanor accepted the invitation to attend Amelia Grant's wedding. The wedding was held at a suburban resort, the atmosphere fresh and distinct. Watching Amelia Grant in her pure white wedding dress, beaming with a happy smile, pledging a lifetime of commitment amidst everyone's blessings. Suddenly, a familiar phone ringtone rang urgently, forcing Eleanor to step aside to answer. Dr. Bennet, the patient in bed number 4, who had surgery yesterday, suddenly fell into a coma. Can you return to the hospital immediately? The worried voice on the other end shattered the sweet atmosphere. I'm coming back now. Eleanor quickly hung up, unable to say goodbye to Amelia Grant. She drove away. The patient in bed number 4 was the first surgery she had performed using the latest medical techniques since returning to the country. If successful, it would bring hope to many other patients. Yesterday's surgery went smoothly, so why the sudden change today? Eleanor Bennet accelerated, wanting to fly to the hospital immediately to assess the situation. But at that moment, a truck came from the opposite curve. Eleanor couldn't avoid it, and her car crashed into the roadside, flipping over. She only felt immense pain, her body seemed to be flying, and then she gradually lost consciousness. She felt as if she had slept for a long time, then slowly opened her eyes. But the scene before her left her completely stunned. She was lying on a carved mahogany bed, surrounded by purple curtains. In front of the bed was a screen painted with camellias. A gilded bronze mirror and an antique-style dressing table were placed beside her. Where was she? Wasn't she supposed to be in the hospital? Eleanor tried to sit up but found her body lacked strength. Looking at the clothes she was wearing, they were clearly ancient attire. Could she be dreaming? Eleanor finally came to this unbelievable conclusion. Miss, you're awake. Thank heavens, you've finally woken up. At this moment, a girl in a green dress ran in, her face filled with joy as she rushed to the bedside. Miss, you made me so worried. As she spoke, the girl burst into tears. Eleanor looked at the person in front of her, her mind full of questions. What was happening? Where was this place? Who are you? Where is this? Eleanor Bennet's mind was full of questions. She vaguely remembered the car crash. Even if it wasn't the hospital, it shouldn't be this place. Miss, what's wrong? I'm Clara Young. Clara Young looked at the familiar person in front of her, her face filled with surprise. Why didn't the lady recognize her? Eleanor looked at Clara Young, realizing this wasn't a dream. After falling into the water, you've been in a coma, and it was so hard for you to wake up. Why do you remember nothing? Clara Young cried even more sorrowfully, wiping her tears as she spoke. Falling into the water? Coma? Eleanor's mind was completely blank. Could she have encountered a cliché time travel scenario? For a doctor who only believed in science and not in the supernatural, this was truly a tragedy. Chapter 2, Side Story 2. Eleanor sat up, struggling to move towards the bronze mirror, with Clara Young quickly stepping forward to support her. Standing before the mirror, the reflection showed a face with skin as white as snow, eyebrows like drawn lines, sparkling almond-shaped eyes, and hair as black as a waterfall. Although there was a hint of illness, it only added to her delicate charm. Eleanor looked at the unfamiliar woman in the mirror and realized that the fantastical event had truly occurred. A part of her soul had entered this body. The original owner of this body was likely no longer in this world. Eleanor sat by the bed, trying to calm herself. If fate had spared her and allowed her to survive in this otherworldly place, then she must live well. She composed herself and observed Clara Young from head to toe. The girl appeared to be about 15 or 16 years old, with a youthful yet charmingly delicate face. Clara Young, I seemed to remember nothing at all. Eleanor decided to feign amnesia to deceive everyone. Miss, do you truly remember nothing? I will go and call Master and Madam, and invite a doctor to examine you, Clara Young said before hurriedly leaving the room. Eleanor looked at herself, realizing she was probably only 15 or 16 years old now. Master? Madam? Aren't they her parents now? Eleanor, you've finally woken up. I was so worried. A woman dressed elegantly entered, tears welling up as she sat beside Eleanor. Following her was a middle-aged man in a dark blue robe, exuding a heroic aura between his brows. Eleanor looked at the unfamiliar woman, momentarily speechless, standing there in a daze. Eleanor, what's wrong? The woman noticed Eleanor's unfamiliar gaze and worriedly asked. Madam, it seems the young lady has lost her memory, she doesn't remember anything. Clara Young said, sniffling beside her. Memory loss? Eleanor, do you truly not remember your mother? I am your mother. The woman cried out in pain, unable to stop her sobbing. Clara Young, quickly tell the butler to invite the physician, let's see what's wrong with the young lady. The man who had been standing behind the woman instructed, looking at Eleanor with concern. About the time it takes to drink a cup of tea later, the physician hurried in. After checking her pulse and asking questions carefully, he went to the table to write a prescription. Physician, what exactly is wrong with my daughter? The man asked anxiously. Sir Bennet, Miss Bennet just caught a cold from falling into the water. I've prescribed a remedy for the cold, she'll recover in a few days, the physician said slowly as he wrote the prescription. Then why doesn't she remember anything? The woman asked, heartbroken. This. The physician hesitated. Perhaps the young lady was frightened when she fell into the water, causing her memory loss. This condition is beyond my expertise. The physician finished writing the prescription and left. So, this body's surname is Bennet. Eleanor looked at the sorrowful woman before her, feeling compassionate. Since she had traveled through time, she decided she must take care of this family. Mother, please don't be sad anymore. Even if Eleanor has lost her memory, she is still your daughter, Eleanor comforted the woman, determined to keep this secret buried. If she were mistaken for a ghost, it would be disastrous. Eleanor, you must not do anything reckless again. How do you expect me to live? The lady held Eleanor's hand tightly, as if she might lose her the next moment. Eleanor seemed to understand something. Could it be that Miss Bennet attempted suicide? Madam, please don't cry anymore. Eleanor is fine now, we should be happy. Let's allow Eleanor to rest and recover, Mr. Bennet consoled beside her. Lady Bennet nodded, reluctantly leaving the room, leaving Clara Young to attend carefully. Clara Young, could you tell me a bit about what happened before? Eleanor knew Clara Young was likely her close maid, and she would know all about Miss Bennet's affairs. Clara Young wiped her tears and began recounting all the past events of Eleanor Bennet. Chapter 3, Northern Kingdom of Bryn. Eleanor finds herself in a completely fictional dynasty, the Northern Kingdom of Bryn. The elder Bennet, Arthur Bennet, holds the position of second-rank minister in the Bryn court. He has a son and a daughter, the eldest son Henry Bennet and daughter Eleanor Bennet. From a young age, Henry Bennet was passionate about martial arts, and at 16, he graduated as the top martial arts graduate. He is currently stationed at the border, serving as a 5th-ranked general. Eleanor Bennet is the current identity of Eleanor. The Northern Kingdom of Bryn has a tradition: daughters of officials under 14 years old cannot marry at will, they must participate in the palace selection process. Eleanor Bennet has just turned 13 and perhaps, not wanting to enter the palace selection a month later, she threw herself into the lake in an attempt to end her life. Hearing Clara Young recount this, Eleanor feels it's a pity for Eleanor Bennet. It's just a palace selection. Being chosen is truly difficult, but getting rejected is quite simple. Why choose death? Was Elder Bennet forcing her for his career path? Or did she have a lover she didn't want to part from? Lying on the bed, countless questions swirled in Eleanor's mind. She sighed deeply, feeling powerless. In her own world, perhaps by now her body would be dust. With her parents gone early, she didn't have to worry about leaving them behind. Since she's here, she must accept it. Palace selection it is. She has watched many palace dramas, and with her intelligent mind, she will surely live well. Eleanor pulled the silk quilt over herself and drifted into a tired sleep. Eleanor's body quickly recovered. These past few days, she hasn't stepped out of her room, only instructing Clara Young to find many medical and historical books of this era. Having been reborn, she must live well. As Eleanor Bennet. From now on, she is Eleanor Bennet reincarnated. With her abilities, living freely and comfortably is enough. Eleanor Bennet looked at the medical books and realized how outdated the medical techniques of this era were. Fortunately, she came from a family of medical heritage, and the skills passed down to her were enough to achieve great things. Eleanor Bennet smiled smugly as she looked at the medical books. "Miss, since when did you like reading medical books?" "I remember you didn't like reading before." Clara Young stood beside her, looking at the lines of text she couldn't understand. She couldn't read, and it seems the young lady only knew a few words from the Book of Womanly Virtues. Women in Bryn have always believed that a woman without talent is virtuous. When it comes to poetry and literature, the things men favor, how much could a woman know, let alone medical skills? The young lady lost her memory, so why did even her interests change? "I'm just curious." Eleanor Bennet smiled at Clara Young's questioning expression. "Clara Young, go to the largest pharmacy in the capital and buy me the best set of silver needles." Eleanor Bennet put down the medical book and stood up to take a few silver bars. "Miss, what do you need silver needles for?" Clara Young looked at Eleanor Bennet, her eyes full of doubt. "Just go, don't ask too many questions." Eleanor Bennet didn't answer, still engrossed in her books. Clara Young nodded and left. It was clear that she still harbored doubts about the current young lady. Could losing one's memory really change a person so much? Eleanor Bennet understood Clara Young's thoughts. Fortunately, she was about to enter the palace, otherwise, Clara Young's suspicions might grow even stronger. She could not return to being the Eleanor Bennet of the past, she could only strive to reinvent herself. Entering the palace was a good opportunity for her. She had planned carefully, as long as she wasn't selected, she would follow the palace rules of Bryn and leave after 3 years. By then, she would be free to continue her dream of helping others. The northern kingdom of Bryn had distinct seasons and abundant resources. Emperor Alexander, king of Bryn, though nearing 50, was wise and valiant, with both civil and military achievements befitting a great ruler. Consequently, the northern kingdom of Bryn flourished, and its people lived in prosperity. Compared to its neighbors, the southern kingdom of Valdora and the western kingdom of Etheria, Bryn had a stronger national power. Eleanor Bennet sat on the chaise longue, feeling a bit tired, and set her book down on the table. Her eyes wandered to the blooming peonies outside the window, and she suddenly felt an urge to go out and explore. She was truly curious about the bustling streets of ancient times. Would they be like those in time travel films, with simple folk and a variety of delicious foods and snacks displayed everywhere? Chapter 4, The streets. Clara Young brought in tea and happened to see Eleanor Bennet gazing at the flowers in a trance. "Miss, here's your tea." Clara Young handed the tea to her. "Clara Young, can we go out for a walk?" Eleanor Bennet didn't take the tea but instead turned to ask Clara Young. "Miss, I'm afraid it's not appropriate. If the master finds out." Clara Young hesitated, as the young lady had never dared to go out on her own before. "It's fine, father is still in court and hasn't returned yet, and mother is at the Buddhist temple. We'll just take a short walk and come back." Eleanor Bennet had made up her mind and instructed Clara Young to help her change clothes. "Do you really want to go out, miss?" Clara Young asked anxiously while doing her hair. "Of course, if I don't go out now, I won't have another chance once I'm in the palace." Eleanor Bennet looked at her reflection in the mirror with excitement. Her long, black hair was tied back with a simple ribbon, cascading over a light pink veil, paired with a pale green dress, giving her a fresh and elegant appearance. Coupled with her stunning beauty, she was truly a captivating sight. She couldn't help but admire Eleanor Bennet's appearance. Eleanor Bennet smiled with satisfaction, took some money, and quietly left the Bennet residence with Clara Young. Eleanor Bennet strolled through the ancient streets, lined with all sorts of charming trinkets. The shops stood close together, bustling with buyers and sellers, a lively and prosperous scene. Eleanor Bennet delightedly wandered through each shop, quickly making her way through several streets. "Young miss, we should head back. If the master finds out, he will surely be furious," Clara Young said as she followed behind, watching Eleanor Bennet's enthusiasm but still felt the need to advise her. Not to mention, the young miss was about to enter the palace. Even on normal days, she couldn't go out so freely like this. "It's fine, I'll head back in a bit." Eleanor Bennet smiled, reassuring her. She understood Clara Young's concerns. After all, she was still an unmarried young lady of a noble family, and moreover, a candidate about to enter the palace. "Young miss, we really should return, otherwise, Madam will be worried." Seeing that she couldn't change Eleanor's mind, Clara Young mentioned Madam Bennet. "All right then, go buy some sweet pastries to bring back, and I'll wait for you here." Eleanor Bennet, tired of the nagging, decided to return to the residence. "Young miss, please don't wander off, all right?" Clara Young, still uneasy, gave her a reminder before heading to the pastry shop across the street. Eleanor Bennet stood on the road, watching the bustling crowd passing by. Suddenly, she felt a sense of loneliness. If it weren't for her recent personal experiences, she might have thought she was merely visiting an ancient town. But the reality was she had truly left her world, never to return. Her eyes carried a trace of sorrow, completely unaware of the commotion happening nearby. In the distance, several horses galloped at high speed, causing panic as people scattered to avoid them. The rider seemed unable to control his steed, which charged directly toward Eleanor Bennet like a gust of wind. By the time she realized the danger, it was too late. She stood frozen, knowing she couldn't avoid it. If this was fate, then so be it. After all, she had already died once. Eleanor Bennet's reaction startled the man on horseback. He immediately leapt off his horse, delivering a strong kick to its head. The horse neighed loudly and collapsed. Taking advantage of the moment, the man caught Eleanor Bennet and landed a few meters away. The dangerous moment ended just like that. Eleanor Bennet straightened herself, the life and death situation feeling as though she had lived through an entire lifetime. "Young miss, are you all right?" The man furrowed his brows slightly, but a faint smile played on his lips. Eleanor Bennet looked at the man before her. His golden crown and jade hairpin complemented his striking features, as radiant as blooming flowers. Dressed in a pristine white robe, he exuded an extraordinary and ethereal aura. She couldn't help but silently admire the noble and elegant demeanor of this ancient gentleman. "Young miss, are you all right? You scared me to death." Clara Young, recalling the earlier scene, burst into tears. She had thought the young miss was about to. "Aren't I perfectly fine?" Eleanor Bennet took out her handkerchief and wiped away Clara's tears. "Thank you, sir, for saving my life." Eleanor Bennet composed herself and bowed slightly to express her gratitude. "It was my horse that charged ahead. I should be the one apologizing to you, young Mississippi. However, I am truly in a hurry. May I ask which residence you belong to?" "I will personally visit another day to apologize," the man said with a faint smile, looking at Eleanor Bennet. "Sir, you're too polite. This incident was partly my fault as well." "Please don't blame yourself," Eleanor Bennet gently declined. "My lord, if we don't leave now, we'll be late," one of the man's subordinates reminded him. "Young miss, I must take my leave," the man said as he mounted his horse and rode away. Eleanor Bennet watched his figure disappear into the distance, her heart still lingering with fear from the earlier incident. "Young miss, we should hurry back to the residence. I'm still so scared," Clara Young said tearfully. All right, let's go back." Eleanor Bennet knew Clara must have been truly frightened. The two of them then made their way toward the Bennet residence. Chapter 5, A Past Connection. Eleanor Bennet returned to the Bennet residence, seemingly unnoticed by anyone. After dinner, Arthur Bennet called her into the study. Seeing her father sitting calmly in the main chair, Eleanor Bennet suspected it was related to the selection process. The path of politics was what people like them were most concerned about. "Eleanor, how is your health now?" Arthur Bennet asked kindly, his face full of paternal affection. "Father, I have fully recovered," Eleanor Bennet replied, bowing her head, not daring to look directly into Arthur Bennet's eyes. "Eleanor, this time your entry into the palace concerns the honor and disgrace of our entire Bennet family. You must not act impulsively anymore." Arthur Bennet sighed helplessly. "Father, I don't understand what you mean," Eleanor Bennet responded, her expression still calm. "Eleanor, once you enter the palace, it is difficult to withdraw. Your honor affects the survival of the Bennet family. I hope you prioritize the family's interests." What do you want me to do? Of course, I will listen to you. Eleanor Bennet understood Arthur Bennet's intentions but pretended to obediently comply. Could a woman truly bear such a heavy responsibility? Eleanor, I know you don't want to enter the palace, but you and William Clark will not have a future. The Bennet family only has you as a daughter. How could I want you to enter the palace? But for the sake of the Bennet family, I hope you understand me. After speaking, tears fell from Arthur Bennet's eyes. Eleanor understands your intentions. Eleanor will remember. Who is William Clark? Eleanor Bennet knew she was right. This young woman indeed had jumped into the lake for the person in her heart. Arthur Bennet looked at his extremely calm daughter in front of him, feeling a shock inside. Every time William Clark was mentioned, Eleanor would make a fuss, but today she was gentle and modest, agreeing to enter the palace. Could it really be due to memory loss? Eleanor Bennet understood Arthur Bennet's doubts at that moment, bowed, and left the study. Standing in the courtyard, she glanced at the flickering candlelight in the study. This William Clark, Clara Young seemed to deliberately avoid mentioning him, so she needed to learn more about Eleanor Bennet's past. Eleanor Bennet returned to her room and asked Clara Young to prepare a bath for her. Clara Young quickly finished preparing and stepped out from behind the screen to help Eleanor Bennet remove her clothes and jewelry. Eleanor Bennet soaked in the warm water, faintly scented with flowers, closing her eyes to relax. The fragrance of the petals mixed with the warm steam rising around her, making Eleanor Bennet feel extremely comfortable. Miss, the madam just sent a message, inviting you to accompany her to Golden Flower Temple to offer incense tomorrow, Clara Young said, taking out a thin robe, ready to assist Eleanor Bennet out of the bath. Clara Young, who is William Clark? Eleanor Bennet asked casually while still sitting in the water. Miss. Clara Young hesitated, looking at Eleanor Bennet. Could it be that the young lady remembered something? What's wrong? Eleanor Bennet noticed Clara Young hesitating for a while, which only confirmed her suspicions about Clara's thoughts. Miss, young Master William Clark is your cousin, and you both grew up together, Clara Young replied hesitantly. The master had warned everyone in the household not to mention William Clark, but the young lady surely remembered him. Oh! Eleanor Bennet's expression remained unchanged as she stood up and stepped out of the bathtub. Miss, the master does not approve of you associating with young Master William Clark. The Clark family has fallen on hard times, and the master only wants what's best for you. Clara Young was worried that Eleanor Bennet might do something unconventional, so she continued to advise her. Eleanor Bennet dressed herself and leaned back on the chaise longue to rest. She knew she had guessed correctly. There must have been a past romance between William Clark and Eleanor Bennet. Unfortunately, she was no longer the same Eleanor Bennet, and the Bennet family truly had nothing to worry about. Don't worry, I don't remember anything from before. Not even William Clark. Eleanor Bennet's voice was devoid of any emotion. Hearing Eleanor Bennet say this, Clara Young felt much more at ease. She finished making the bed, helped Eleanor Bennet lie down, and then quietly left the room. She always felt that the young lady had become colder and more unpredictable than before. Chapter 6, Golden Flower Temple. Madam Bennet was having breakfast in the main hall. After greeting her, Eleanor Bennet sat down to eat. Madam Bennet looked at Eleanor Bennet, feeling a pang of sorrow. Mother, why aren't you eating anymore? Eleanor Bennet noticed the sadness on her face. I don't know how many more meals I will have with Eleanor. Madam Bennet thought about her daughter soon entering the palace, and tears welled up in her eyes. Madam, Eleanor is still at home. Let her stay by your side today. Arthur Bennet held Madam Bennet's hand, comforting her. Mother, no matter where I am, I will always remember you. Eleanor Bennet still felt a bit distant from Madam Bennet, but her sincere tears moved her. Madam, the carriage is ready. The butler entered the main hall at that moment to report. Madam, let's go, we're running late. Eleanor Bennet assisted Lady Bennet towards the main entrance. Following behind were several maids and attendants. As they reached the door, they coincidentally encountered Arthur Bennet, who was preparing to board a carriage in his official attire. Eleanor Bennet quickly bowed to bid farewell. These ancient customs were indeed numerous, Eleanor Bennet sighed reluctantly. Then she joined Lady Bennet in the carriage. Eleanor Bennet peered outside through a gap in the carriage curtain. It was early autumn morning, with remnants of night dew still lingering. A refreshing breeze brushed against her face, bringing an incredibly pleasant feeling. The streets were already bustling with people, and shops on both sides were open, with vendors' calls echoing everywhere. Eleanor Bennet lifted the curtain, marveling at the bustling capital. Her gaze swept over the crowd and suddenly stopped at a man in a blue robe standing not far away, looking at her. His deep black eyes, high straight nose, and fair skin were marked by a melancholy expression. Eleanor Bennet was surprised. Who was he? From those sorrowful eyes, it seemed he knew her. She stared at him, a sense of curiosity rising within her. Eleanor! Lady Bennet's gentle call interrupted Eleanor Bennet's thoughts. Mother! Eleanor Bennet smiled, leaning against Lady Bennet, temporarily setting aside the earlier encounter. Eleanor, we'll stay at Golden Flower Temple for a few days. You're about to enter the palace, and I want to pray for your well-being. Mentioning the palace brought a touch of sadness to Lady Bennet. Mother, I'm just entering the palace, I'll always think of you. Eleanor Bennet smiled softly, her calm demeanor somewhat reassuring Lady Bennet. My Eleanor has truly grown up. Lady Bennet embraced Eleanor Bennet, gently comforting her. The carriage traveled east and soon stopped in front of the Golden Flower Temple gate. As Lady Bennet and Eleanor Bennet alighted, the abbot approached to greet them. Lady Bennet, Miss Bennet, I welcome you, the abbot said, clasping his hands in respect. The master is too courteous. Today, I bring my daughter to the temple to pray for blessings. I hope the master forgives this intrusion, Madam Bennet replied politely. Madam, with your compassion and kindness, you are sure to receive the Buddha's blessings. Please, come in. The abbot said with a smile, gesturing for them to enter. Eleanor Bennet looked at the temple before her, with its green tiles and glazed roof, incense smoke swirling in the air. Pilgrims came in a continuous stream. Passing through the spacious and bright front hall, they arrived at the Hall of Great Strength. A vast courtyard, spanning dozens of yards, lay before them, with a golden plaque shining majestically. Entering the main hall, the golden statue of the Buddha exuded benevolence and solemnity. Madam Bennet and Eleanor Bennet stepped forward to offer incense, bowing reverently. This temple was no less impressive than those of the 21st century. The towering pillars suggested it had stood for hundreds of years. After offering incense, Eleanor and Madam Bennet exited through a side door, following the monks' quarters to the guest house in the rear courtyard. Madam Bennet and the young lady may stay in the western chamber. I shall prepare for tomorrow's blessing ceremony. Soon, a monk will bring vegetarian pastries and tea, the abbot said, clasping his hands in farewell. Thank you for your trouble, abbot. Here is a small donation from the Bennet family, Madame Bennet said, handing over several banknotes to the abbot. Madame Bennet is truly compassionate, a blessing to all beings. The abbot graciously accepted the donation and departed. Eleanor Bennet helped Madame Bennet into the room. The room was simply and cleanly furnished, with only a bed, an octagonal table, and several pots of lucky bamboo. Opposite the main door stood a statue of Guanyin. Upon entering, Madame Bennet bowed reverently to Guanyin, with Eleanor following closely behind. "Eleanor, I haven't completed my morning prayers yet." "You go rest in the room first," Madame Bennet said, taking out a sandalwood prayer bead necklace, sitting cross-legged before the Buddha statue, and closing her eyes to chant. "Mother, I would like to take a walk around the temple," Eleanor Bennet softly requested. "Very well, but don't leave the temple grounds and return soon." "Clara Young, take care of the young lady," Madame Bennet instructed. Eleanor Bennet bid farewell and left the room, retracing her steps to the main hall. As she walked, she quietly admired the century-old temple. Behind the main hall was a release pond with clear water, surrounded by fragrant flowers and singing birds. "Clara Young, I'm feeling a bit cold," Eleanor Bennet said, sitting by the pond as the autumn breeze made her feel chilly. Golden Flower Temple, built against the mountain, seemed much colder than the city. Eleanor regretted not wearing an extra cloak. "Miss, I'll fetch your cloak." "Please wait here," Clara Young said, hurrying away. Eleanor Bennet was lost in thought, watching the turtles in the water, unaware of someone approaching. "Eleanor!" Startled, Eleanor Bennet looked up at the familiar face before her, a fleeting image from her memory. Was it him? The man who had been staring intently at her carriage on the street. He seemed agitated, stepping forward to grasp Eleanor Bennet's hand. She recoiled in fear, trying to pull her hand away. "Who are you?" Eleanor Bennet asked warily, her eyes darting around, ready to flee. "Eleanor, do you truly not recognize me? I am your cousin William." The young man appeared distressed, wondering if she had really lost her memory. He had thought that Mr. Bennet intentionally said so to separate them. "Are you William Clark?" Eleanor Bennet recalled what Clara Young had mentioned the other day. Was this the person the original owner liked? She assessed William Clark from head to toe, her eyes filled with unfamiliarity. Chapter 7, Late Night Encounter. Eleanor Bennet returned to her room, gazing at the large character, Enlightenment, on the wall, feeling suddenly bewildered. The suffering of all beings, perhaps, stems from the difficulty of realizing the truth. Clara Young noticed Eleanor Bennet standing motionless, assuming she was thinking about her encounter with William Clark earlier. "Miss." Clara Young hesitated, unsure whether to ask or not. "Is something the matter?" Eleanor Bennet sat down, lowering her head to sip tea. "Miss, do you truly not remember young Master William Clark?" Clara Young asked cautiously. "No, I really don't remember," Eleanor Bennet replied calmly. "Please don't blame young Master William Clark for his rashness today. You not remembering him might be more painful for him than death." Clara Young seemed to empathize with William Clark. "Clara Young, don't mention him again. Even if I remembered, we could never be together," Eleanor Bennet said, picking up a Buddhist scripture to read, and told Clara Young to rest. This place was so dull, without computers or phones, and Eleanor Bennet began to miss her high-tech devices. She put the book down in frustration, wanting to go outside for some fresh air. Sleeping this early was something she still wasn't used to. Eleanor Bennet strolled out onto the corridor, leisurely walking under the flickering lantern light. It was so quiet at this hour. The monks in the temple rose early, usually retiring after the evening chants. Eleanor Bennet enjoyed the tranquility of the night, undisturbed, accompanied only by the faint scent of flowers and the sound of birds. Behind the temple stood a tower. Eleanor Bennet had intended to visit it during the day but forgot because of William Clark. Seeing the light from the tower, she headed towards the back courtyard. Climbing the green stone steps, Eleanor Bennet noticed the lanterns around the tower were brightly lit, but the door was closed. Slightly disappointed, she was about to turn back when she heard a series of coughs. Curious, Eleanor Bennet followed the sound behind the tower and found a man in a purple silk robe sitting on the stone steps, wrapped in a fur cloak. Although it was late autumn, it wasn't cold enough to wear fur. Intrigued, Eleanor Bennet approached, meeting the wary gaze of the man. His eyes were sharp as knives. If looks could kill, Eleanor Bennet knew she would have died countless times by now. "Who are you?" The man coughed continuously, appearing weak but still maintaining his aura. "I am a pilgrim in this temple." Eleanor Bennet stepped back in fear, sensing danger. The man's face was pale and sweaty. His eyes were so beautiful that even women would be envious, yet they were cold as ice. His handsome features seemed crafted by a supernatural hand. How could such a captivating man exist? At that moment, Eleanor Bennet's mind was entirely captivated by his natural charm, forgetting her fear. The man painfully clutched his arm, and Eleanor Bennet noticed it was covered in blood. Was he injured? Perhaps due to her instincts as a healer, Eleanor Bennet quickly moved forward to examine his wound. "Who are you?" The man raised his sword, cautiously eyeing Eleanor Bennet like a hedgehog on guard, his gaze full of hostility. "You're injured, let me see." Eleanor Bennet maneuvered past the sword, bending down to inspect the wound on his right arm, unfazed by his threatening demeanor. "Are you a doctor?" the man asked, staring intently at Eleanor Bennet. "Your wound is deep and needs stitching, or this arm will be useless." Eleanor Bennet didn't answer directly, instead using a handkerchief to tightly bandage his arm to stop the bleeding. The man continued to cough incessantly, his body seemingly very weak. Eleanor Bennet checked his pulse, discovering a cold energy within him, possibly the cause of his coughing and pale complexion. "Do you have asthma?" Eleanor Bennet saw a flash of surprise in his eyes. Just then, several men in black suddenly appeared in front of him, moving so quickly that Eleanor Bennet felt dizzy. Could this be the legendary martial arts technique? Subordinates greet the master. "We apologize for our late arrival and await your punishment." The leading man in black knelt to the ground, seeking forgiveness. "We'll discuss your punishment later, get us out of here." The man coldly ordered, his voice weak yet still filled with menace. The men in black hurriedly obeyed, helping the man in purple up. Eleanor Bennet watched them, beginning to worry about whether she might be silenced. Curiosity killed the cat, indeed. "Take her with us." The man glanced at Eleanor Bennet, smirking coldly. She tried to flee but was knocked unconscious by the men in black. When Eleanor Bennet awoke, she found herself lying on a bed draped with delicate silk, intricately carved with mahogany designs. As she sat up, she saw the man sitting on the bed with his eyes closed, resting. He had changed into a silver-white robe, with a cloak embroidered with golden snowflakes. He really was afraid of the cold. Remembering how he had worn a fur coat earlier, Eleanor Bennet couldn't help but laugh. "Awake?" The man opened his eyes to look at Eleanor Bennet. "How is your injury?" Eleanor Bennet got out of bed and approached him, intending to check his right arm. "Can't you see for yourself?" The man remained seated, his expression arrogant. Ignoring him, Eleanor Bennet rolled up his sleeve and saw her handkerchief stained with blood on his arm, indicating the bleeding had stopped. Could ancient people really know how to stop bleeding by pressing acupoints? I need a needle, thread, alcohol, silver needles, and clean water. Eleanor Bennet instructed the man. Blood shadow. As soon as the man spoke, a shadow swiftly appeared. Master. The shadow knelt and saluted. Go prepare. The man commanded, and the shadow vanished. Eleanor Bennet was astonished, looking towards the door. Was this the legendary phantom illusion? She was truly amazed. While Eleanor Bennet was still in awe, everything she needed was ready. Eleanor Bennet took the handkerchief, cleaned the man's wound with fresh water, and then used alcohol to disinfect it. In this era, there was no antiseptic, so alcohol had to suffice. She prepared to sterilize and stitch his wound. It might hurt a bit, I'll use silver needles to ease the pain, Eleanor Bennet explained before starting to sew. Suddenly, a cold sensation at her neck made her pause. If you can't save the master, watch out for your life, warned the shadow from earlier. Blood shadow. The man signaled for him to step back. You can begin now, the man said calmly. Eleanor Bennet steadied her nerves and began stitching. In the time it took to drink half a cup of tea, she skillfully finished. Despite the change in time and place, her technique remained unchanged. Her natural smile caught the man's eye. Fetch some clean white cotton cloth, Eleanor Bennet ordered Blood Shadow at the door, feeling slightly annoyed. Blood Shadow glanced at the man on the bed, then turned and left, quickly returning. Eleanor Bennet removed the silver needle from the man's right arm. It will hurt a bit for the next few days, so don't move it carelessly, Eleanor Bennet advised as she bandaged the man with cotton. Who are you? The man suddenly asked. Then who are you? Eleanor Bennet retorted, her eyes showing fear but retaining her composure. The man smiled faintly and drank the tea beside him. Blood Shadow, escort the lady back, the man ordered. Remember, you never met me tonight. The man's warning carried a deadly threat, sending chills down one's spine. Eleanor Bennet understood she had encountered someone she shouldn't have and was lucky to keep her life. She followed the shadowy figure and was quickly returned to the western room of the Golden Flower Temple. Watching the shadow disappear into the night, she reflected on the strange encounter and couldn't help but feel afraid. Who exactly had she met? Eleanor Bennet felt exhausted, lay down on her bed, but couldn't stop replaying the scene in her mind. Only when sleep overtook her did she finally drift off. Blood Shadow quickly returned to report. The man's pale face, illuminated by candlelight, appeared even more chilling. Blood Shadow, who is she? The man suddenly asked. She is the daughter of Megan Bennet, Eleanor Bennet, Blood Shadow replied. The daughter of Arthur Bennet? The man's face remained calm, showing no surprise. How does she know medicine, and such a unique form of it? He thought of Eleanor Bennet's cheerful smile, the image unconsciously flashing through his mind. I want to know everything about her. His face was as cold as ice. I will investigate immediately. Blood Shadow bowed and left the room. Eleanor Bennet. The man caressed the jade ring on his finger, a cunning smile forming on his lips before he coughed weakly from exhaustion. The next morning, Eleanor Bennet was still asleep even when Clara Young entered the room. Miss, wake up and freshen up. Soon, you'll need to accompany Madam for the blessing ceremony. Clara Young held out the prepared clothes for Eleanor Bennet. Eleanor Bennet sat up with a fatigued expression, getting ready to wash her face. "Miss, why didn't you remove your dress before sleeping last night?" Clara Young noticed the wrinkled gown Eleanor Bennet was wearing, her tone filled with curiosity. "Oh, I stayed up late reading and fell asleep just like that." Eleanor Bennet casually made up an excuse. "Clara Young, I'm thirsty. Go prepare some tea for me." Eleanor Bennet noticed a blood stain on her sleeve, undoubtedly from the previous night. She quickly sent Clara Young out of the room. Once Clara Young left, Eleanor Bennet hurriedly changed her clothes, cutting off the stained fabric with scissors and burying it in a flower pot. If Clara Young saw the blood, it would lead to unnecessary explanations. The man from last night was certainly not someone easy to deal with. This time, she had definitely gotten herself into trouble. She prayed fervently to all the gods, hoping never to meet him again. In moments of desperation, everyone wishes for a bit of luck. After freshening up, Eleanor Bennet went to Madame Bennet's room. Following breakfast, she accompanied Madame to the grand hall. By then, the abbot had prepared everything and was waiting for Madame. They exchanged a few pleasantries before beginning the blessing ceremony and chanting. Eleanor Bennet knelt on a cushion, looking around. It was her first time witnessing a Buddhist ritual, and she felt a bit curious. However, the novelty soon wore off. It was unbearably dull. The chanting of dozens of monks became overwhelming, and coupled with her poor sleep from the night before, her head felt like it was going to explode. She endured it until the ceremony finally concluded. "Eleanor, didn't you sleep well last night? Why do you look so pale?" Mrs. Bennet asked worriedly. "Mother, it's nothing, I'm just a bit tired," Eleanor Bennet replied with a smile. "After we distribute the blessed cakes, let's head back home," Mrs. Bennet suggested. "I'll do whatever you decide, Mother," Eleanor Bennet answered obediently. After distributing the blessed cakes at the temple, Mrs. Bennet bid farewell to the abbot and returned home. "Eleanor, here is a peace charm I requested for you," Mrs. Bennet said as she got into the carriage, handing Eleanor a red charm bag. "Thank you, Mother. I will keep it with me always," Eleanor said happily, leaning gently beside Mrs. Bennet. Sometimes, she truly admired this identity, having both parents, something Eleanor Bennet could never have. Her parents had perished in a plane crash 3 years ago. The pain of that loss was indescribable. Only when something is lost does one understand its true value. Eleanor Bennet's eyes welled up with tears. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" Mrs. Bennet noticed Eleanor's change in demeanor and asked with concern. "It's nothing, Mother. I'm just a bit sad thinking about having to enter the palace and being away from you," Eleanor replied, wiping her tears with a silk handkerchief. "Eleanor, I don't want you to compete for favor as a concubine. The worldly glories are all illusions. I only wish for your safety," Mrs. Bennet said, hugging Eleanor with a heavy heart. From then on, Mrs. Bennet had one more worry in the world. Chapter 8, Saving a Life. Eleanor Bennet couldn't shake the unease when she remembered the man she met at Golden Flower Temple that night. He would surely come looking for her again. Despite his injuries, she couldn't avoid him. Reluctantly, Eleanor sat at her desk, wrote down a few medicinal names, and led Clara Young out of the house. "Miss, where are we going?" Clara Young asked, trailing behind, worried about what might happen. "You'll know when we get there," Eleanor replied with a smile. Soon, they arrived at Harmony Hall, the largest pharmacy in the capital. As they entered, the strong scent of medicine filled the air, bringing Eleanor a familiar feeling. At that moment, a quick-footed shop assistant approached them. "Miss, are you here for a consultation or to buy medicine?" the assistant asked. "Young master, do you have these medicines in your shop?" Eleanor Bennet handed over the prescription. "Yes, we do. Please wait a moment, miss. I'll fetch them right away." The shop assistant went behind the counter to gather the medicines. Eleanor Bennet sat observing the pharmacy, impressed by its grandeur. It had 2 floors, with rows upon rows of long medicine cabinets. Over 10 people were busily organizing herbs. In the eastern part of the main hall, there was a warm room adorned with beaded curtains, and 2 elegant potted orchids placed outside its entrance. Eleanor assumed it must be the consultation room. "Miss, here are your medicines." The shop assistant handed the package to Clara Young. "Young master, do you sell silver needles here?" Eleanor Bennet recalled Clara Young's unsuccessful search for them last time and thought there might be a chance they were available here. "Miss, we don't carry those," the assistant replied. "Do you know where I could buy some? Don't your physicians use them?" Eleanor Bennet was reluctant to leave empty-handed. Without modern medical equipment, she often had to rely on acupuncture. I'm not sure, miss. Perhaps you could inquire at a jeweler's shop to see if they can make them for you." Eleanor Bennet looked disappointed. It seemed that was her only option. Just as she was about to leave, a man carrying a woman on his back rushed into the shop in a panic. "Doctor! Doctor! Please save her!" the man shouted desperately as soon as he entered. The shop assistant quickly led them to the waiting area. Eleanor Bennet stayed back, observing from a distance, delaying her departure. At that moment, a young man in white stepped out from the consultation room, instructing the man to lay his wife on the ground. After checking her pulse, his expression turned grim. "Prepare for her funeral." "I can't save her," the young man said with a regretful look. "Dr. Moore, please save my wife," the man pleaded, kneeling down. "I'm helpless too," the man in white sighed. At that moment, Eleanor Bennet stepped forward, bending down to check the woman's pupils and pulse. "How did she fall into a coma? When did it happen?" Eleanor Bennet asked the kneeling man. "Just now, she was eating cake when suddenly she couldn't speak and then fell into a coma on the way here," the man recounted through tears, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Quickly, bring a small knife here. She can still be saved." Eleanor Bennet ignored the astonished looks from those around and began performing chest compressions. The man in white signaled for the assistant to quickly fetch one. He watched Eleanor Bennet's actions with a puzzled expression. The assistant hurriedly brought a small knife to Eleanor Bennet. She swiftly made an incision on the woman's neck. At this point, the man in white grew anxious and hastily tried to intervene. "If you want her to live, don't interfere," Eleanor Bennet commanded sternly, causing him to freeze in fear. "Bring me a brush." The man in white entered the inner room and quickly retrieved a brush. Eleanor Bennet broke the handle, took the middle part, and inserted it into the incision she had made. Then, she continued with CPR. After about the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, the woman seemed to regain her breathing. Eleanor Bennet felt her heartbeat. "Help me lift her up." Everyone around, except for the man in white, was stunned. The man in white calmly assisted Eleanor Bennet. From her confident gaze and skilled movements, he realized he had encountered an expert today. Eleanor Bennet pressed firmly on the woman's chest from behind, causing her to expel a lump of mucus. Eleanor Bennet cleaned the residue, and the woman gradually regained consciousness. Eleanor Bennet sighed in relief, having successfully saved a life. "I need needles, thread, alcohol, and clean cotton fabric." Eleanor Bennet laid the woman down. A growing crowd gathered around, and Harmony Hall was packed with onlookers. "You truly are a living saint. How can we ever repay such immense kindness?" The man, seeing his wife come back to life, dropped to his knees and kowtowed before Eleanor Bennet. "Please, stand up. It's just a small matter, no need for such formality." At that moment, the young man in white had prepared everything Eleanor Bennet asked for. Without pausing, she soaked the needle and thread in alcohol, removed the pen case, and skillfully began stitching the woman's wound. "Do you have a silver needle?" Eleanor Bennet asked the young man in white. "One moment." The young man in white smiled and went into the inner room to retrieve one. Eleanor Bennet used the silver needle to stimulate several acupuncture points. The young man and the surrounding crowd stared in awe. What kind of medical skill was this? She sewed up a human being as if mending clothes, and astonishingly, the woman seemed to feel no pain. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Eleanor Bennet completed all the steps, carefully bandaged the wound, and stood up. "Make sure the wound doesn't get wet, and come back here in 3 days to have it redressed," Eleanor Bennet instructed while washing the blood off her hands. "Thank you, miss, for saving her life." The couple knelt down to express their gratitude. "Please, stand up. I dare not accept such gestures." Eleanor Bennet helped them up gently. "A miracle doctor. Truly a miracle doctor, bringing people back from the brink of death." The crowd marveled at the sight of someone who seemed lifeless being revived. "Thank you for lending me the silver needle and for your assistance," Eleanor Bennet said with a radiant smile, handing the needle case back to the young man in white. "Your medical skills are extraordinary. I am truly humbled. Please accept this as a token of my admiration," the young man in white replied with a smile. It was only then that Eleanor Bennet took a closer look at him. His demeanor was gentle and composed, his features handsome and refined, like a warm ray of sunlight. "May I know your name, miss?" the man asked as he caught up with Eleanor Bennet, who was about to leave. "Eleanor Bennet. I am Daniel Moore." After Eleanor Bennet bowed in greeting, she smiled slightly and departed. Eleanor Bennet noticed Clara Young staring at her in astonishment the entire way, and she chuckled quietly to herself. Today, this young girl must have been quite startled. It wasn't until they returned to the Bennet residence that Clara Young began to process everything that had happened. "Miss, you were truly amazing today. When did you learn such miraculous medical skills?" Clara Young looked at Eleanor Bennet with admiration. "Just a few days ago," Eleanor Bennet replied casually. "Just from those medical books?" Clara Young couldn't believe it, glancing at the books on the table. "Miss, that Moore gentleman is a renowned physician in the capital. Harmony Hall belongs to him. He often visits the palace to treat the emperor. The person he couldn't save today, you did. Doesn't that make you even more skilled than him?" Clara Young's face was full of excitement. Eleanor Bennet had already guessed that someone so young with such a large enterprise must possess exceptional talent. "Clara Young, don't let my parents know about today," Eleanor Bennet instructed. Such a rapid change would only arouse suspicion. If it weren't for saving a life, she would never have shown off like that today. "I understand, miss," Clara Young replied. "Prepare a furnace and a pot for me, I want to brew some medicine." Yes, miss. Clara Young asked no further questions because the young lady had changed so much, and she preferred this version of the lady who saved lives in times of crisis. Eleanor Bennet was preparing several ointments to treat external wounds. Without specific anti-inflammatory drugs, she could only use certain remedies to remove necrotic tissue and regenerate skin. Eleanor Bennet pondered, perhaps she should craft some surgical tools. But in this era without stainless steel, what material could she use? She sketched the surgical instruments she needed with a pen, thinking she might take them to the blacksmith when she had some free time to inquire. After dinner, Eleanor Bennet leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes to rest. The weather was gradually getting colder, making her feel even lazier. Clara Young sat by the round table, embroidering a scented sachet. Clara Young, did I know how to do needlework before? Eleanor Bennet suddenly wanted to know what exactly a young lady of noble birth was supposed to learn. Of course, my lady, but you used to embroider mostly to give gifts to Master Clark. Clara Young quickly realized her slip of the tongue and immediately fell silent. Aside from embroidery, what else did I enjoy doing? Eleanor Bennet ignored the mention of William Clark. My lady was skilled in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, though you disliked reading. I remember back when you were made to memorize the Book of Womanly Virtues, the master reprimanded you many times. The Book of Womanly Virtues? Women of ancient times were truly pitiful, their thoughts confined from a young age. At home, they had to obey their fathers. Once married, they had to obey their husbands. She couldn't help but feel sorry for the former Eleanor Bennet. My lady, do you truly not remember anything about the past? Clara Young, do you think I'm worse now? Eleanor Bennet asked in return. My lady, you are now gentler and more composed. Compared to your previous stubbornness and headstrong nature, it's as if you're a completely different person. Eleanor Bennet merely smiled faintly at these words. Wasn't it true that they were two entirely different people? It's just that no one believed it. After chatting with her maid for a while, Eleanor Bennet instructed Clara Young to rest. Sitting alone on her bed, she began reading a book, still unaccustomed to sleeping so early. At that moment, a shadowy figure suddenly appeared in the room. Eleanor Bennet was startled but couldn't make a sound. She stared wide-eyed at the figure before her and realized it was the black-clad man who had brought her back that night. My lady, my master requests your presence. Blood Shadow said, lifting Eleanor Bennet and leaping out of the window. Her entire body was immobile, leaving her no choice but to comply. Eleanor Bennet was taken to a lavishly decorated room. Inside, on a crimson-lacquered redwood bed, a man dressed in a black silk robe was sipping tea, a snow fox fur draped over him. Someone so afraid of the cold, it could only be him. Eleanor Bennet wasn't surprised to encounter him again. Master, Miss Bennet has arrived. Blood Shadow knelt to report. So, he already knew her identity? Eleanor Bennet fixed her gaze on the man on the bed. If he wasn't afraid of the authorities, he was either a rebel or someone with immense power. Which category did he belong to? Eleanor Bennet speculated silently. Either way, she knew she should steer clear of both. The man gestured for Blood Shadow to release Eleanor Bennet's pressure points, and she immediately felt much more at ease. Miss Bennet, please have a seat, the man said calmly, as though he hadn't just abducted her. Eleanor Bennet said nothing and directly sat on the opposite bed. Your method of inviting someone to treat an injury is quite unique. Eleanor Bennet remarked angrily, her almond-shaped eyes glaring at his captivating face. The man simply coughed lightly and didn't respond. Eleanor Bennet approached him of her own accord, pulling up the sleeve of his injured arm to inspect the wound. After all, the sooner it was treated, the sooner she could leave. Chapter 9, Harmony Hall, Wine. Bandages. Eleanor Bennet commanded, glancing at Blood Shadow, who stood motionless like a stone pillar beside her. Without hesitation, Blood Shadow turned and left the room, returning in the blink of an eye with everything she needed. Eleanor barely had time to marvel at his lightning speed before quickly cutting a piece of cotton cloth. She examined the wound, noticing that it had scabbed over, but the swelling and redness suggested an infection. However, this was within her expectations. Carefully, Eleanor soaked the clean cotton in alcohol and began disinfecting the wound. The man sitting on the bed winced slightly in pain, prompting Eleanor to pause and look at him. The wound is slightly infected, but endure it a bit, and it will heal soon, Eleanor said gently, her soft tone surprising the man. She seemed entirely unafraid of him, and a warmth crept into his heart. I forgot to bring my medicine. Eleanor muttered in frustration, tossing the used cotton aside. Blood Shadow, fetch it immediately. The man ordered, and Blood Shadow vanished instantly. Eleanor sat on the bed, sipping tea, her gaze drifting to the man beside her. His luxurious attire suggested he was no common rebel. Could he be from the imperial court? But why would someone from the court appear at Golden Flower Temple, and injured at that? Eleanor studied the mysterious, cold man and sighed softly, unaware that every one of her expressions was being observed by him. Where did Miss Bennet learn her medical skills? The man suddenly asked. Self-taught, Eleanor replied curtly, casting him a glance. The man sneered, the teacup in his hand shattering. Startled, Eleanor wondered if this seemingly ailing man was also a martial arts master. Self-taught? How is that possible? He pressed. Have you never heard of the divine tree? Eleanor retorted, unwilling to reveal that her soul had entered this body. He wouldn't believe her anyway. The divine tree? The man scoffed, clearly skeptical of such a fantastical tale. If you know my surname is Bennet, you must also be aware of the incident where I fell into the water, Eleanor said, confident that the man before her had thoroughly investigated her background. He must know about the near-drowning incident. And what does that have to do with Miss Bennet's medical skills? The man poured himself another cup of tea, his cold gaze scrutinizing her. I was on the brink of death when an elderly man with white hair and beard saved me. He erased my memories of my past life and passed on these peculiar medical skills. Eleanor fabricated a mythical tale to deflect his questioning. Oh? The man, already aware of her memory loss, pondered whether the divine tree might actually exist. He smirked coldly but said no more. Regardless of the truth, he was determined to uncover the details. At that moment, Blood Shadow returned, breaking the silence. Eleanor took the medicine vial from him. It was indeed the ointment she had recently prepared. This man truly had the makings of a perfect spy. Eleanor applied a small amount of the ointment to the man's wound, then carefully bandaged it with cotton cloth. Change the dressing every 3 days, and ensure the wound stays dry. Eleanor Bennet tidied up the ointment and washed her hands with clean water. Blood Shadow, escort Miss Bennet home. The man commanded, and Blood Shadow obediently led Eleanor Bennet out. Eleanor glanced at the man lying on the bed, his pale face illuminated by the flickering candlelight, exuding loneliness. By the time Eleanor Bennet returned to her room, it was late at night. She suddenly realized how mysterious the man's movements were. After healing his wound, would she be silenced? Eleanor sprang from her bed, regretting her curiosity that night. Now, even if she wanted to escape, she couldn't. He knew her surname was Bennet and surely knew her family, especially Arthur Bennet. Yet she knew nothing about him. She couldn't involve others. Eleanor sighed, curled up in her blanket, and dared not think further. Let things take their course. After all, her life was a gift. In her free time, Eleanor Bennet went to the garden pond, sitting idly watching the goldfish swim. She had been passing the time like this for days. She increasingly felt sorry for women of the past, confined indoors and unable to work. No wonder they spent their days scheming against each other. Miss, Madam requests your presence at the Buddhist temple. Clara Young stood in the hallway, smiling gently at Eleanor Bennet's bored expression. Eleanor stood up, adjusted her attire a few times, and headed towards the Buddhist temple, wondering what Madam Bennet wanted with her. Entering the Buddhist temple with curiosity, Eleanor saw Madam Bennet chanting sutras before the Guanyin statue. The scent of sandalwood filled the room. The furnishings were simple, lacking the grandeur of a matriarch. It seemed Madam Bennet truly led a life of spiritual devotion, detached from worldly affairs. Mother, why did you call for me? Eleanor Bennet smiled, kneeling beside Madam Bennet. Seeing Eleanor, Madam Bennet's face lit up with joy. Eleanor, the day you enter the palace is approaching, and we must prepare new clothes and jewelry. Madam Bennet embraced Eleanor lovingly. I'll leave everything to you, Mother. Eleanor sat affectionately in front of Madam Bennet. Today, let the butler accompany you to stroll around the city. Buy whatever you like. I am a practitioner, so it's not convenient for me to go out, Lady Bennet said, her voice tinged with a bit of guilt. Mother, there's no need for the butler. Clara Young is enough. I'm about to enter the palace, can you let me go out on my own this time? Eleanor Bennet pleaded coquettishly. If she had a whole entourage following her, how could she enjoy herself? This matter, Lady Bennet hesitated. It was indeed unconventional, but thinking of her beloved daughter soon to be confined within the palace walls, she couldn't bear to refuse. All right then, but you must return early. Clara Young, take good care of the young lady. Lady Bennet reluctantly agreed, not forgetting to give a few reminders. Madam, Clara Young will obey. Clara Young quickly bowed in response. Mother, thank you. Eleanor Bennet hugged Lady Bennet and kissed her cheek. Lady Bennet was startled. What was with this child? But her heart felt warm. Ever since Eleanor Bennet fell into the water and lost her memory, she had changed a lot. Sometimes she was gentle and obedient, other times lively and mischievous. Moreover, she seemed to have become particularly filial and understanding. Chapter 10, Spring Full Pavilion. Eleanor Bennet casually picked out a few rolls of silk and some jewelry before preparing to return to the Bennet residence. She wasn't particularly interested in these selections, why bother putting effort into the imperial selection anyway? Through the sedan curtain, Eleanor Bennet noticed a large tavern bustling with people. Clara Young, what's that place? Eleanor Bennet lifted the curtain and asked. Young lady, that is Spring Full Pavilion, the most famous tavern in the capital, Clara Young replied. Clara Young, stop the sedan. Eleanor Bennet suddenly wanted to see what this five-star hotel of ancient times was like. Young lady, aren't we returning to the residence? Let's have a bite to eat before heading back. Eleanor Bennet stepped out of the sedan and entered Spring Full Pavilion. As soon as she entered, a waiter enthusiastically greeted her. Waiter, give me a private room. Eleanor Bennet glanced at the 4-story tavern, bustling and packed with patrons. The waiter led Eleanor Bennet to the 3rd floor, into a private room adorned with a basien table. A few pots of orchids were placed on the writing desk by the window. Through the beaded curtain, one could see the stage in the center of the tavern. The design of Spring Full Pavilion was indeed unique. Eleanor Bennet sat down and ordered a few dishes of dim sum and a pot of premium by Luo Chun tea. Clara Young, come sit here, Eleanor Bennet called out to Clara Young, who was standing nearby. Young lady, this servant dares not sit, Clara Young replied. We're not in the residence, don't be so formal. Eleanor Bennet pulled her to sit down. Young lady, we should return soon, Clara Young urged. It's still early, now that we're out. Eleanor Bennet smiled gently at Clara Young and leisurely sipped her tea. At that moment, the sound of a pipa gently echoed from downstairs. Eleanor Bennet pulled back the beaded curtain to look out. A delicate woman in a red dress was sitting on a stage, playing the instrument. Her face was pale, with an ethereal sadness like mist, her fragile appearance moving to the heart. Even as a woman, Eleanor Bennet found her pitiable. Truly a person in the mundane world, yet pure like a white lotus. Eleanor Bennet stood up, stepped out of the room, and leaned against the railing, listening to the melodious music, entranced. As she was absorbed in the music, a commotion rose from downstairs. Several burly ruffians dragged a man in a green brocade robe inside. The woman in red on stage clutched her pipa tightly, trembling. Sophie Turner, it's been a while. I've missed you. The man leered at the woman in red with a lustful gaze. The ruffians immediately rushed onto the stage, grabbing her. The instrument fell to the floor, her mournful cries mingling with the sound of the broken strings, making the scene even more sorrowful. Please, young Marquis, spare Sophie Turner. She will definitely repay your debt. The woman in red knelt, pleading. The man laughed sinisterly, stepping closer and lifting her chin with a fan. Sophie Turner, I don't want your money, I want you. His hand roved over her face. Young Marquis, please spare Sophie Turner. Sophie Turner begs you. She continued to plead, tears streaming down her already fragile face. You should consider it an honor that I've taken an interest in you. Don't be ungrateful. Take her away. The man slapped the girl's pale face hard, and his henchmen dragged her out. People around whispered, but no one dared intervene. How much does she owe you? I'll pay. Eleanor Bennet slowly descended the stairs, speaking up to stop them. Clara Young wanted to intervene but was signaled by Eleanor Bennet to hold back. Oh, such a beautiful lady, like a fairy descended to earth. The man looked at Eleanor Bennet with a lustful gaze. Release her, whatever she owes, I'll pay. Eleanor Bennet glared at him and stepped beside the woman in red. Beautiful lady, I advise you not to meddle in others' affairs. No one dares to oppose someone from the Duke of Stirling's residence. I find you extraordinarily beautiful, why don't you come with me, and I'll let her go. As he spoke, he reached out to touch Eleanor Bennet's face. She quickly stepped back, avoiding his filthy hand. You shameless scoundrel! Your appearance offends my eyes. Eleanor Bennet looked at him with disdain. Oh, such a fiery temper, just my taste. Quickly, seize her for me. The man laughed triumphantly, ordering to capture her. Eleanor Bennet was shocked that such blatant abduction could occur in broad daylight. Not wanting to suffer a loss, she immediately ran upstairs. Seeing Eleanor Bennet flee, the man angrily ordered his henchmen to chase after her. They aggressively rushed upstairs. As she was about to be caught, a young man with a golden headdress and a silver-white brocade robe suddenly appeared before her. "You, kid, get out of the way, don't meddle in others' affairs," the thugs threatened the man blocking their path. "Benjamin, take care of them," the young man smiled and instructed the person beside him. Then he turned to Eleanor Bennet. "Miss, it's been a long time, how have you been?" Eleanor Bennet looked at the man before her, feeling a sense of familiarity. "Are you the gentleman who saved me last time?" Eleanor Bennet recalled the terrifying scene on the street. It was indeed him. "It is I." The young man's lips curved into a perfect smile, his dark eyes shining like stars. By now, the sound of fighting was heard not far away, and the thugs were quickly knocked to the ground, unable to get up. "Young Marquis, it's been a while. How is the Duke of Stirling these days?" the man on the upper floor asked. "So it's the third prince. I didn't know you were here," the man in green downstairs said, slightly fearful, completely losing the arrogance he had earlier. "He's a prince." Eleanor Bennet looked at the man with a gentle demeanor. No wonder she always felt he exuded an extraordinary aura. "If I weren't here, I wouldn't have known that under the Emperor's feet, in broad daylight, there could be such a shameless person as the Marquis." The young man's words were gentle yet sharp, but his face maintained a gentle smile. "The third prince misunderstands. I must take my leave." The man in green wanted to slip away quietly. Chapter 11, Lost 3 days later, Eleanor Bennet arrived at Harmony Hall as promised. With only a few days left before she had to enter the palace, she wanted to check on the woman one last time, ensuring everything was complete. Upon entering Harmony Hall, Eleanor Bennet saw Daniel Moore examining a patient in the warm room. They exchanged knowing smiles, and Eleanor Bennet sat down in the main hall, sipping tea while she waited. In less than the time it took to finish a small cup of tea, Daniel Moore came out and sat in the chair next to Eleanor Bennet. "I apologize for keeping you waiting, Miss Bennet," he said. "You're too courteous, Mr. Moore," she replied. "Miss Bennet, please wait a moment," Daniel Moore said mysteriously before leaving. Shortly after, he returned from the back room, holding a cloth bag. "Look at this, Miss Bennet," he exclaimed. Eleanor Bennet curiously opened the bag, her face showing clear astonishment. "You've really done it," she said, looking at the scalpel, hemostat, surgical scissors, and other tools in the bag, her face filled with joy. Although the craftsmanship wasn't as refined as the instruments she had used before, she was very satisfied. "Daniel Moore, thank you so much," Eleanor Bennet said as she hugged him, leaving Daniel Moore momentarily stunned and awkward. Today, she was completely different from the calm and composed image he had of her. Yet, he found her all the more special. "Sorry, I was just too happy." Eleanor Bennet realized her impulsiveness, especially given the very feudal era they lived in. Daniel Moore simply smiled, though his fair face blushed slightly. "Miss Bennet, your patient has arrived." At this moment, a servant came to report, dispelling the awkward atmosphere. "I'll go see the patient first," Eleanor Bennet said, hastily leaving in embarrassment. Eleanor Bennet entered the warm room, checked the woman's wound, and saw that it had healed completely and could have the stitches removed. The new scissors were very handy. After sending the woman off, Eleanor Bennet felt as refreshed as a spring breeze, experiencing a sense of achievement lost and then regained. "Mr. Moore, thank you for making these for me, they're really useful," Eleanor Bennet said, putting away the medical instruments with a smile. No need to thank me, I should be thanking you. Without you, that lady might have returned to the earth, Daniel Moore replied casually. I would love to invite you to work at the clinic, but I wonder if it's convenient for you? Daniel Moore proposed, with a hint of personal interest. I'm afraid I can't accept, Mr. Moore, Eleanor Bennet replied, thinking of her impending duty at the palace, feeling a tinge of melancholy. Do you have something difficult to say? Daniel Moore felt a bit disappointed. Could it be that he and she were not destined for each other? Yes. But I really want to be friends with you. Daniel couldn't wish for more. All right, from now on, let's call each other by name, no more addressing as lady or gentleman. Eleanor Bennet smiled brightly, like a blooming peach blossom. Daniel, see you again. Eleanor Bennet stood up to take her leave. Eleanor Bennet, see you again. Daniel Moore realized that today, she came to bid him farewell. Watching her figure gradually disappear, his heart ached. Was she about to get married? Daniel Moore's heart, once filled with hope, suddenly shattered. In the north, there's a beauty, an unparalleled beauty, one that topples kingdoms. Better not to know such beauty, for such beauty is hard to find. Eleanor Bennet returned to the Bennet residence, pondering over Daniel Moore's reaction, feeling that something wasn't quite right. Perhaps she had been too emotional today. Miss Clara Young looked at Eleanor Bennet, wanting to speak but hesitating. Ever since returning from Harmony Hall, this young lady had been acting strangely. If you have something to say, just say it. Eleanor Bennet leaned against the bed, peeling peanuts. Miss, could it be that you fancy Mr. Moore? Judging by Eleanor Bennet's demeanor earlier, it was certain she had feelings for Daniel Moore. Don't speak nonsense. And don't bring it up again in the future. Eleanor Bennet stuffed a peanut into Clara Young's mouth, her expression fierce as if warning her. Clara Young secretly rejoiced. The lady's strong reaction surely meant her guess was right. It's just a pity that the lady was soon to enter the palace, and fate was likely to be fleeting. Eleanor Bennet noticed Clara Young's alternating expressions of joy and sorrow and immediately knew what the girl was thinking. Clara Young, I'm tired now. You should go back to your room and rest. Eleanor Bennet instructed her to leave, lest she overthink things. Yes, miss. Clara Young replied and then exited the room. Eleanor Bennet gazed at the flickering red candlelight, unconsciously thinking of Daniel Moore. Her impression of him was very good, but there was just a lack of spark. Perhaps this was what they called no chemistry. In matters of the heart, even a hint of forcefulness wouldn't do. Miss Bennet, the master requests your presence. Eleanor Bennet was startled by the sudden voice and saw Blood Shadow, dressed entirely in black, standing before her. She almost forgot about this major nuisance. Don't seal my acupoints. I'll grab some ointment, and then I'll go with you. Eleanor Bennet stood up, took her ointment and tools, and was promptly escorted out by Blood Shadow. Once again, she saw that man, still sitting on the bed, covered with a fur blanket. He coughed incessantly, his complexion even paler. Seeing that his cough seemed worse, Eleanor Bennet stepped forward to check his pulse. The man glanced at her, a trace of a cold smile appearing on his face. Eleanor Bennet frowned, the cold syndrome in his body seemed to have worsened. Eleanor Bennet rolled up his sleeve to examine the wound. His injury had healed well. Today, the stitches could be removed. After about half an hour, Eleanor Bennet had finished treating him. Does it not need to be bandaged anymore today? The man looked at Eleanor Bennet's peculiar tools and asked. It's healed, there's no need anymore. Eleanor Bennet packed up her things, exhaling a light sigh of relief. Why do you have such a severe cold ailment? Eleanor Bennet couldn't help but ask. Can you cure it? A sly expression briefly flashed across the man's face. Even if I could, I wouldn't. Eleanor Bennet deliberately provoked him, but to her surprise, it seemed like a challenge in his eyes. The man suddenly pulled her into his arms, gazing down at her face. Aren't you afraid I'll kill you? His voice was icy. Precisely because I'm afraid, I won't cure you. Though frightened, Eleanor Bennet managed to stay composed. Gazing at his stunningly handsome face up close, her heart began to race uncontrollably. Miss Bennet, you are truly unique. The man chuckled softly, lowering his head to inhale the faint fragrance emanating from her neck. You, let me go. Eleanor Bennet panicked slightly, struggling to break free. She hadn't expected someone who seemed so frail to possess such strength. Could he be faking his illness? But where did the cold energy in his body come from? Eleanor Bennet glared at him, refusing to back down from his icy gaze. Blood Shadow, escort Miss Bennet back. The man abruptly released Eleanor Bennet and gave the order. Eleanor Bennet adjusted her slightly disheveled attire and quickly left the oppressive room. Eleanor Bennet, until we meet again. The man leisurely sipped his tea, speaking as Eleanor Bennet was about to exit. No, until we never meet again. Eleanor Bennet retorted before leaving the room. Back in her chamber, she tossed and turned all night. Her mind was filled with the image of that man. Who exactly was he? Why did he have such a severe cold ailment? Was it real or fake? Countless questions swirled in Eleanor Bennet's head, but one thing was clear, staying away from him was for the best. Tonight, she had already sensed the danger he posed. Chapter 12, Entering the palace amid the beautiful autumn sunshine, the chrysanthemums remained fragrant. Sitting alone in the study, her thoughts wandered aimlessly. The vibrant scenery was fleeting, and all she could do was lift a cup of wine to drown her sorrows. Eleanor Bennet sat on the veranda, gazing at the blooming autumn chrysanthemums in the garden, her heart filled with melancholy. Tomorrow, she would have to enter the palace, and the entire Bennet residence was bustling with preparations for the event. Yet, she sat there alone, silently lost in thought. Tomorrow would be a day many girls dreamed of. A chance to rise above, where even the most breathtaking landscapes would pale in comparison. Eleanor Bennet sneered coldly, already plotting how to get herself eliminated and avoid passing the preliminary selection. After dinner, Arthur Bennet sent someone to summon Eleanor Bennet to the study. She guessed it must be about tomorrow's entry into the palace. Daughter greets father. Eleanor Bennet smiled and curtsied. Eleanor, have a seat quickly. Arthur Bennet said enthusiastically, stroking his beard. Eleanor, tomorrow you will enter the palace. Remember to be cautious with your words and actions, avoid bringing trouble upon yourself. I will remember your teachings, father, Eleanor Bennet obediently replied. I have arranged everything in the palace. Someone will take good care of you. Arthur Bennet looked at his daughter with affectionate eyes. His daughter was naturally beautiful. In the future, she would surely be favored and rise to the top of the harem. Father, I have something I don't understand. Eleanor Bennet couldn't quite grasp Arthur Bennet's intentions. The emperor was already old, and even if she were favored, it would be fleeting like the ephemeral night blooming Sirius. Once the throne changed hands, the Bennet family's position would still be precarious. A cunning old fox like him surely had plans for the future. Eleanor, speak your mind without hesitation. Arthur Bennet noticed the doubt in Eleanor's expression. Father, Eleanor wants to know your true intentions, Eleanor Bennet asked directly, no longer holding back. Haha. Eleanor has truly matured. You've begun to understand my thoughts, Arthur Bennet remarked, surprised at how his usually headstrong and willful daughter now appeared so composed. Eleanor, I've removed your name from the initial selection list. With your beauty, becoming the head of the inner palace one day isn't far-fetched. But there's no need to rush. Eleanor Bennet sighed upon hearing this. It seems the old fox had planned far ahead, and she was merely a pawn he placed in the palace. Father, the emperor currently has 5 princes, yet has not appointed a crown prince. How do you know who will be the future ruler? Eleanor Bennet wanted to know which faction the old fox supported. I'm not entirely sure at the moment. The emperor currently favors the 9th prince, Charles King, but he is proud by nature and seriously ill, not the best choice for crown prince. The 5th prince, Richard King, has a passion for military strategy and is bold, but lacks wisdom. He is a capable general but not fit to be an emperor. The 1st prince, David King, is arrogant and indulgent, and the emperor has long grown tired of him. The most likely candidates are the 3rd prince, Edward King, and the 4th prince, Edward King. Eleanor Bennet listened to Arthur Bennet's precise analysis, realizing he had a plan in mind. Father, do you want me to associate with the 3rd and 4th princes? Eleanor Bennet inquired. No, I want you to quietly observe the changes. The emperor's intentions are hard to discern. Do not hastily involve yourself in the struggle for the throne until you clearly understand his wishes. I understand. Arthur Bennet was indeed a cunning old fox. Unfortunately, she had no interest in this political whirlpool and only wished to escape in 3 years. As for the position of favored concubine, whoever wanted it could fight for it. Eleanor, the rise and fall of the Bennet family rests on your shoulders. Be cautious in the palace. Arthur Bennet reminded her once more before allowing Eleanor Bennet to leave. Leaving the study, Eleanor Bennet couldn't help but reflect on the ruthlessness of the imperial court. Everything could be traded, everything could be exploited. She recalled Lady Bennet's words, prosperity is but a dream, ultimately nothing but emptiness. Perhaps she had long known Arthur Bennet's schemes but felt powerless to change them. Immersed in spiritual practice, perhaps because she had nothing left to hold on to, or because she had seen through the world. But Eleanor Bennet was different now, she would not let anyone control her. She sensed that this entry into the palace would be extremely dangerous but also full of drama. The next day, Eleanor Bennet carefully dressed and left the residence. All the servants of the Bennet residence stood waiting outside the door. Seeing Lady Bennet's red eyes, Eleanor Bennet knew she had cried all night. Arthur Bennet, in his official robes, stood silently on the stone steps. I bid farewell to you, father, mother. Eleanor Bennet knelt and bowed. Eleanor. Lady Bennet embraced Eleanor Bennet, her voice choked with emotion. Mother, don't be sad. I will visit you whenever I have the chance. Eleanor Bennet knew that only the person before her truly loved her. Lady, Eleanor's entry into the palace is a joyous occasion for the Bennet family. Why cry like this? Arthur Bennet expressed his displeasure. Eleanor, hurry into the carriage, don't miss the auspicious time. Arthur Bennet instructed. Clara Young, please take good care of my mother. Eleanor Bennet instructed Clara Young, who was sobbing beside her. Miss, you must take care of yourself. Clara Young supported Madam Bennet, reluctantly bidding farewell to Eleanor Bennet. Eleanor Bennet stepped into the palanquin. From this moment on, she would vanish like a person of the past, leaving no trace behind. Today, the Radiant Sun Gate was unusually lively. Though it was early winter, the scenery remained as vibrant as spring. Young ladies from various households were dressed extravagantly, gathering in large numbers. As Eleanor Bennet stepped down from the palanquin and observed the scene, it reminded her of a modern-day Miss Hong Kong pageant. The thought brought a faint smile to her lips. Beauties adorned themselves for their beloveds, and noble men sacrificed for their confidants. What a pity it was to see such youthful vibrance go to waste. At that moment, the Radiant Sun Gate swung open, and dozens of eunuchs emerged from within. Leading the group was an elderly eunuch. "Ladies, thank you for waiting. Please follow this old servant into the palace." The eunuchs standing on either side respectfully guided the group of young women into the Radiant Sun Gate. Eleanor Bennet walked slowly along the wide, greenstone-paved path. The towering red palace walls on either side exuded a stifling yet majestic air. As the gates ahead gradually opened, golden-tiled roofs, imposing red walls, and the grandiose architecture of the royal palace came into view. White jade railings and uneven steps further accentuated the royal splendor and magnificence. "Ladies, this is the Hall of Righteous Proclamation, where His Majesty holds court. Without being summoned, you must not enter recklessly," the sharp voice of the leading eunuch reminded the young women, who were momentarily dazzled by the opulent surroundings. The group proceeded through a corridor and entered another palace gate. Inside, crystal-clear streams flowed gently, pavilions and towers interwove, and the scenery was captivating. The intricately carved corridors led them to a western garden, where several other palaces stood. Though less grand than the Hall of Righteous Proclamation, they still exuded an air of luxury. Eleanor Bennet entered a small courtyard where a group of palace maids awaited. After bowing to an older female official dressed in palace attire, the leading eunuch exited with the other eunuchs. "Ladies, you've had a long journey. I am Li Shang Gong, responsible for this selection process. Those whose names are called, please step forward." Eleanor Bennet understood that this was the preliminary selection. Arthur Bennet had arranged for her to be eliminated, sparing her any concern. "Madam Tu, please escort these young ladies to Manhwa Palace for rest. After learning the palace etiquette, they will participate in the main selection." An older palace servant received the order and led a group of maids away with the young women. Watching the departing beauties, Eleanor Bennet couldn't help but feel sorrowful. Such vibrant youth was about to wither in the confines of this heavy, oppressive palace. Those who fail the preliminary selection will be assigned to serve the masters in various palaces. The palace rules are strict, so I urge everyone to be cautious in both words and actions. After 3 years, you may return home. Li Shanggong's sharp gaze swept over the remaining individuals, lingering on Eleanor Bennet for a moment. "Madam Chen, take them away. Assign them to the palace stewards." Li Shanggong instructed an older palace servant beside her. Eleanor Bennet left the courtyard, slowly trailing behind. She was unsure which master she would serve in this harem. Madam Page had the palace attendants lead away each unchosen beauty one by one. Finally, only Eleanor Bennet remained. "Miss Bennet." Madam Tracy bowed in greeting. "Greetings, Madam Page." Eleanor Bennet quickly returned the gesture. Judging by her age, she must be a respected figure in the palace. Miss Bennet is truly a rare beauty, captivating and enchanting. No wonder Chief Lee is in a dilemma over where to place you, Madame Tracy said with a knowing smile. I'm not sure what you mean, Madam, Eleanor Bennet replied, puzzled. Hadn't Arthur Bennet already arranged everything? You are wanted by both the master of the Palace of Scenic Blossoms and the Cloudy Vale Palace. Naturally, Chief Lee is in a difficult position. Therefore, he has instructed me to arrange for you to serve His Majesty at the Hall of Heavenly Purity. This is unavoidable, and I hope you understand. Serve His Majesty? Eleanor Bennet was surprised that after all this, she still couldn't escape. Just serving tea as a maid beside the Emperor. Miss, there's no need to be so surprised. Tracy Mama seemed to see through Eleanor Bennet's thoughts, smiling meaningfully. Eleanor Bennet thanks Mama for her concern. Eleanor Bennet bowed in gratitude. You are intelligent and quick-witted, surely you understand the rules of the palace. This old servant will take you to meet Eunuch Liam. With that, Tracy Mama led Eleanor Bennet to the Hall of Heavenly Purity. This was Emperor Bryn's residence. Just a glance at the golden dragons on the beams and pillars was enough to know this place was extraordinary. Tracy Mama brought Eleanor Bennet to stand outside the hall, and after a moment, an elderly eunuch stepped out from within. Greetings, Tracy Mama. This old servant greets Eunuch Liam. The two exchanged courtesies. Eleanor Bennet glanced at the newcomer, noting from his attire that his rank was not low. This is Miss Bennet? Eunuch Liam carefully observed Eleanor Bennet. His sharp eyes seemed as though they could see right through a person. This servant greets Eunuch Liam. Eleanor Bennet bowed respectfully. You are indeed clever and astute. Lady Lee of the Shang Palace has quite the discerning eye. Eunuch Liam was very pleased with Eleanor Bennet's composed and perceptive demeanor. Despite being a noble lady, she carried a calmness and sharpness that set her apart from the usual arrogant young mistresses. Xiao Shizi, take Miss Bennet to rest first. She will meet the Emperor shortly. Eunuch Liam instructed the eunuch beside him, smiling knowingly. Eleanor Bennet bowed and followed the eunuch away. Miss Bennet, this is your room. Let me know if you need anything. Xiao Shizi said cheerfully, helping Eleanor Bennet with her luggage. Eleanor Bennet thanks you, eunuch. Eleanor Bennet bowed. Miss, there's no need for such formalities. Xiao Shi doesn't dare accept. Eleanor Bennet observed the boy, who seemed around 15 or 16 years old, still carrying a hint of youthful innocence. Eunuch, please just call me Eleanor Bennet. I've just entered the palace and will need your guidance, Eleanor Bennet said as she handed some silver to Xiao Shizi. Thank you, Miss Eleanor Bennet. Xiao Shizi accepted the silver and left happily. Eleanor Bennet looked at the simple furnishings and placed her belongings into the cabinet. Sitting on the bed, she pondered over the words of Madame Page. The mistress. Lily Traynor pays respect to Miss Eleanor Bennet. The palace maid first saluted Eleanor Bennet. Miss Lily Traynor, you're too polite. Eleanor Bennet returned the gesture. These are the imperial garments that Eunuch Liam instructed me to bring. Please change and then go to pay. Respects to the Emperor. Lily Traynor placed the garments down, smiling at Eleanor Bennet. Miss Eleanor Bennet, you are truly beautiful and graceful. Lily Traynor complimented. Miss Lily Traynor, you flatter me. I'm grateful for your trouble in bringing the garments. Eleanor Bennet politely poured tea for Lily Traynor. Please, there's no need to be so formal. We are both palace maids serving tea to the Emperor. I entered the palace a year before you, so if you don't mind, you can call me sister. Lily Traynor, with her gentle nature, made Eleanor Bennet happy to work alongside someone like her. Sister Lily Traynor, I hope to learn much from you in the future. Eleanor Bennet bowed respectfully. Miss Eleanor Bennet, you make me feel embarrassed. Lily Traynor helped Eleanor Bennet up. There are many rules here, especially since we serve closely to the Emperor. We must be careful with our words. One wrong word could bring disaster. You must remember this. Lily Traynor reminded Eleanor Bennet while helping her change into the garments. Eleanor Bennet will remember. Casually, she removed a jade hairpin and handed it to Lily Traynor. She understood that in a place where feelings were disregarded, only wealth was truly useful. In the evening, Eleanor Bennet and Lily Traynor waited outside the Hall of Heavenly Purity to be summoned. At this moment, Eunuch Liam stepped out from the hall. You two may enter to serve. Do not disturb the Emperor. Eunuch Liam instructed further. Lily Traynor and Eleanor Bennet carried the tea tray into the grand hall. Inside, delicate silk curtains, jewels, and winding golden dragon pillars filled the air with a fragrant aroma, a scene both solemn and luxurious. Lily Traynor led Eleanor Bennet behind a screen adorned with a meticulously carved landscape painting on southern wood. Lily Traynor signaled Eleanor Bennet to place the tea tray on the table inside. She then personally lit a golden stove, filling the golden kettle with spring water to boil. Sister Lily Traynor, what kind of tea does the Emperor usually prefer? Eleanor Bennet asked softly. The Emperor's favorite is Snow Tomb from Sung Mountain. This tea is very rare, and only a few favored concubines in the palace have it. Lily Traynor took out a brocade box from the tea table, revealing an exquisite jade jar inside. This is Snow Tomb. Lily Traynor poured a little into the tea set to prepare. No matter how good the tea is, drinking it constantly might become tiresome. Eleanor Bennet commented as she looked at the tea leaves. That's true, but we must cater to the master's preferences. Lily Traynor understood this principle well. Sister Lily Traynor, let's try making a special tea today. Eleanor Bennet had an idea. Eleanor Bennet, what special tea is this? Lily Traynor, sister, could you help me prepare a few things? Eleanor Bennet gently whispered into her ear. Eleanor Bennet, are you sure about this? Lily Traynor looked at her skeptically. This could easily cost them their lives. Sister, trust Eleanor Bennet just this once. Eleanor Bennet replied confidently. Lily Traynor also wanted to try her luck. If the Emperor praised her, it would undoubtedly be a good thing. If he was displeased, she could entirely shift the blame onto Eleanor Bennet. After calculating carefully, she left. In the time it takes to drink half a cup of tea, she brought everything Eleanor Bennet needed. Eleanor Bennet quickly got to work, and before long, she had finished. Lily Traynor instructed Eleanor Bennet to deliver it to the inner chamber. Eleanor Bennet quietly stepped inside and immediately saw a middle-aged man dressed in a resplendent golden dragon robe, exuding an imposing aura, sitting at the imperial desk reviewing memorials. Eleanor Bennet took a deep breath, summoning all her courage, and placed the tea on the desk. Your Majesty, please enjoy the tea. Eleanor Bennet said softly. Leave it there, the Emperor responded without raising his head, placing the memorial he held to one side. Eleanor Bennet stood silently in the corner, not daring to utter another word. This man's presence was so overwhelming that it made her incredibly tense. The Emperor took a sip of the tea and then placed the cup down firmly on the desk. What is this? His cold voice caused Eleanor Bennet to draw in a sharp breath. "Your Majesty, please forgive me. This is snow pear chrysanthemum tea, prepared by this servant. Since the winter air is dry and your Majesty works tirelessly day and night, this servant brewed this tea to nourish the lungs and promote health. You're a new palace maid?" Alexander King looked at the unfamiliar face before him. "This servant is newly assigned to serve tea in the palace." Eleanor Bennet's voice trembled slightly. Indeed, being near the emperor was like standing near a tiger. At that moment, Eunuch Liam heard the commotion inside and hurriedly entered. Seeing Eleanor Bennet kneeling on the ground, he immediately understood that she had displeased the emperor. "Your Majesty, this old servant is at fault for allowing a new palace maid to attend to your Majesty." Eunuch Liam knelt down to plead for forgiveness. "Look up." Alexander King ignored Eunuch Liam and stared directly at Eleanor Bennet.